Hello, everyone. Welcome to Google. My name is Andres. I'm a front-end developer in DoubleClick. We have the largest, can you hear me? Good. We have the largest Angular application in the universe, according to one of our developers. We have been working on Angular for more than 2 years, and we work very closely with the Angular team. Um, Very recently, I have been working with Julie Ralph, the author of Protractor. Protractor, I'm going to be talking about this, is a framework to test Angular applications. So let's go to a talk. The agenda is going to be about testing. I'm going to show you the basics of Protractor. Protractor it's based on Webdriver.js. I'm going to give you a few demos. I'm going to show you some best practices. It's a relatively new framework, so best practices, imagine quotes, because those are my practices, because we don't have like a lot of tests yet. And then I'm going to show you a few tips, something that I learned during my initial integration tests, and what problems I had and how I solved them, and hopefully you don't have to repeat those. Okay, so how many of you have written end-to-end tests? Okay, quite a few. So um, I'm going to describe what exactly I mean by end-to-end testing and what's the difference between unit testing and end-to-end testing. So when you're writing unit tests, imagine that you have an application that has 3 or more layers. You have your front end, which is your Angular application, and you have unit tests for that. Maybe you have a middle tier on the back end, which is a database or some persistence layer. And then you write unit tests, but you're really testing a single feature, and you're very limited to the interaction and what you're testing. So it looks something like this. So you have some tests for your middle tier, some tests for your controllers or your directives, but you really don't know if your application is working. You have to make sure that everything is connected. And as someone said in my previous job, is like you can have the best application, but if your combo box or your save button doesn't work, then basically you don't have a save application. So when you're testing a feature with end-to-end testing, you have to make sure that all of the components and all of the little pieces and your save button and the directive and the controller and the services, everything is connected. And you have to make sure that when you save, it goes all the way to a persistence layer and it comes back. And you have to do it automatically, because doing it manually, it's a pain in the ass. And every time you have to go to production, you have to spend hours or maybe half an hour or an hour doing it manually, and it's horrible. So why would you use Protractor? Um, some people ask me what's wrong with the Angular scenario runner, and here are some of the reasons. It hasn't been updated in 2 years. There have been some bug fixes, but uh, it's really limited. So everything you run is inside an iframe. And if you want to interact with something that is external to your application, let's say you need to log in, or maybe you need to open like 2 windows at the same time, you can't do it. It's whatever you can do inside that iframe, that's all you can test. Um, with Protractor, it's more stable. You can take screenshots and okay, I'm gonna show you like the basics of Protractor. Protractor is based on WebDriver, Selenium WebDriver. They basically mean the same, Selenium and WebDriver. They used to be 2 different projects, but eventually they merged, and now they mean the same. So I'm gonna say WebDriver instead of Selenium WebDriver. So how many of you have experience with WebDriver or have heard about WebDriver? Okay, so WebDriver is a suite of tools that allow you to automate tests, and they run several browsers. So you have different plugins, and you can run Chrome or Internet Explorer or Firefox or other things like Android. And it can be controlled by several like different programming languages. You can do Java, Python, or JavaScript. In this case, I'm going to be showing you how to do your tests in JavaScript with Node.js. Protractor is implemented in JavaScript. And it's very popular. It has a lot of support, and it's a great framework to test your applications because it basically mimics what a real user would perform on a browser. So all of the actions like clicking on an element, entering text, hitting enter or hitting escape or stuff like that, you can mimic those operations on a web browser. So let me show you a little bit about Webdriver. If you want to learn Protractor, you need to understand how Webdriver works. So you have something called the Selenium web server. It's a server that you start, and it will interact with several browsers, one or more browsers. It connects to your Angular application, and it's a process that you start. It opens a server in a port, and you issue instructions on this server, and it performs actions on your behalf. There's a Webdriver JS API, and you send instructions, and you say, okay, find this element, click on this button, go to this URL, and so on. So your tests are written in JavaScript. You execute these tests through Protractor, and the Protractor communicates with the Selenium web server through HTTP. So I'm going to show you an example of a WebDriver test, how it looks, something very simple. So in this test, we're going to import a module, like a regular Node application. So we use WebDriver. We configure it. We create a new instance with the builder. We pass the capabilities. Here we are saying, okay, use Chrome, and then you build it. And then you have driver. Driver is the object that allows you to interact with the browser. So in this example, we are going to Google and we're going to search for something. So the first action is going to a URL. So you go to google.com. And then you have this syntax that has promises. So you find an element, you say driver, find element, and you have like a strategy, a locator strategy. And you say, okay, find by name, find by CSS, find by XPath. So there are like multiple ways to find an element. Once you find the element, you can send keys. Imagine you are searching for WebDriver, then you find the search button and you click on it. Then you wait a few milliseconds and eventually you get the title and you assert that the title is WebDriver Google search. So here, whenever the promise is fulfilled, you're going to get the text of the title and then you do an assertion. So this is kind of flaky because you really don't know how long the server is going to take to respond. So usually when you're writing WebDriver tests, the most difficult part is synchronization, and sometimes it takes longer, and it usually, like, it's a cause of many flaky tests. So whenever you have all of these instructions for WebDriver, WebDriver has something called the control flow. It uses a promise manager, and the promise manager has a queue of all of the instructions that it has to perform. So even if this is all asynchronous, it simulates, well, it executes all of these instructions in the same order as you have them in your test. And then after execute one instruction, it's ready, then it performs the next one. So in this case, it would go to google.com, find the elements, send text, click on the button, wait, and then it would do an assertion. Okay, so Protractor extends WebDriver. So you have the WebDriver API, and on top of that, it will add some functionality. So you have WebDriver.js, you have Protractor, which is an extension of WebDriver. It adds capabilities. And then you have your test code, and it looks something like this. You have a Protractor binary, and you pass a configuration. And you also have this Selenium standalone server, so you start it. So I'm going to show you how it, oops, sorry. Okay. So here I'm going to start my Selenium standalone server. Okay, and it's ready. And I'm going to show you how to run a protractor test. In this case, we are going to go to the Angular application. We are going to enter some text, and then we're going to do an assertion. So I just do protractor and the configuration file. I don't know if you can see, sometimes it goes really, really fast. It will open Angular, it will set a text here. And then it will assert that this changes. I'm going to show you the code in a few seconds. And it tells you, okay, there was one test, one assertion, and no failures. So why you should use Protractor? It extends the WebDriver API. It has some convenient locators. And the most important feature to me is it waits for Angular. So you don't have to synchronize, you don't have to sleep, you don't have to say, wait until this element is visible, wait until this state is there. So if you have something in flight, let's say you have an HTTP request or a timeout that is waiting to finish, Protractor knows it's connected to Angular, it knows when it's ready, and then it proceeds with your instructions. So it's transparent to you, you don't have to synchronize anything, you don't have to sleep, and it's like very, very stable. There are no more flaky tests. It's great because it adds some custom selectors. And this is how you would write a test in Protractor. It's based in this case, we are using Jasmine. So if you are familiar with Jasmine, you have a test suite. A test suite is a describe block. So here I have a suite and I have a unit test. A unit test is a neat block. So you say it should enter a name, and then we have pretty much the same syntax I showed you before. It will go to AngularJS. It will find, and here is where Protractor is very convenient because I'm going to Angular, it will find my model. This is one of the extensions that Protractor has. It will send keys, and it will find an element by binding, and it will get the text. So in the case of AngularJS, it will come here, it will enter some text, and as you can see here, there's an ng model. It will find this element by model, and this one is a binding. So it says hello and whatever it's bound to your name in the scope. And okay, here there are two ways to write your test. You have a promise, you find the element. When it finds the element, it will fulfill the promise and it will give you the value. So here I'm saying, okay, get text. And when it gets a text, I'm gonna do an assertion. So I say expect text to be hello Andres. There's a modification that Julie wrote, which is really nice. Instead of having this promises syntax, you can do something like passing a promise to the expect function, and it will resolve it, and then it will do the assertion for you. So you can do it like this, but you can also do it like in the shorter format, which is, okay, expect element by binding, get text to be hello Andres. And it's the test I just showed you. Okay, so the locators that Protractor has, um, there are a few that you can use. There's by binding, which is very convenient. So whenever you have like this syntax to bind some value from the scope to your view, or whenever you have an ng model, you can do by model, or you can also do by repeater. So if you're finding an element inside a repeater, let's say you're drawing a table, you can do it by column or by row. And a protractor configuration file looks like this. It's very short. You can add more stuff, but this is the most basic configuration file. You have the Selenium web server. So this is the location where it will communicate this port, this URL. Then you say, okay, this is going to be the pattern of the tests that you're going to be running. Then you can say, okay, the capabilities. In this case, I'm passing a couple of attributes. The first one is run Chrome, and the second one is I want to pass flags to Chrome. So usually when you start your Chrome, you have all of your extensions, and then it opens tabs, and it's like kind of noisy. And you can say, okay, disable extensions, or you can pass any other flags if you know how to configure it. You can pass a base URL. So instead of saying in your test, like go to localhost port 3000 slash and so on, you can say, okay, based on this URL, you just pass the relative path. And then you can pass more options like the timeout interval. It's by default 10 seconds or I don't remember, but you can override it. So today I'm going to be showing you a simple Angular application that I built. It's called the Protractor band application. You can have members, albums, and bands. So here I'm simulating a slow application. So if you see, it loads the band members and then it responds. Whenever I want to create a new one, I go here, I save it, and we have a new element. Okay. So if you are starting from scratch and you want to create a protractor project, you can use a tool that I built. How many of you are familiar with Yeoman, a code generator? Okay, so I created a Yeoman code generator, which is called generator protractor. So you just execute yo protractor. Hold on. And it will ask you a couple of questions. The first one is what's the name of your configuration file? And I'm going to say this one because I'm lazy. And what's a base URL? You say this, it will download all of the dependencies. It will create an empty node application for your that includes the protractor dependencies. And it has a simple test. So let me show you how it looks. We have the package.json that includes the protractor dependency. And it also has, um, under tests, it has a sample unit test. So this one is very simple, but it shows you how to test something really, really basic. And if you want to run it, you just say protractor and then the configuration file. Hold on. So it will go to, and it's really, really fast. So sometimes you can't even see it. So in the example I was showing you, I was putting some slips so you can see how it flows. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how to write a very simple test for the band application. And the architecture of the application is really, really basic. So we have an Angular application. We have a REST API, which is written in Express. And for the persistence, I'm using MongoDB. So we have 3 layers. Everything is running locally. And okay, in this case, I'm going to show you how to test creating a new member. You're going to go to the new member list. You're going to click on the create new. You're going to enter a name. you're going to click on save, and then you're going to do an assertion saying, okay, make sure that the member was created. So if you go here, you navigate to the member list. As you can see, there's a wait here. So Protractor will wait for this to happen. You can click on the create. You can enter a name. Then you have to find the save button and then do an assertion. I'm asserting on this title, and I want to say, okay, if this thing member created is there, then the test is good. And this is how it looks. So maybe the only thing you can see is the loading. And I did that on purpose because if it didn't have the timeout, it would go like so fast, it would run in like a second. So that's like a very basic, let me put it in presentation mode. Okay, so it will navigate to the member list. It will find by link text. This is one of the locators that Protractor has. It will find an element by model. It will say, okay, new member. It will click on the save button. And here there are like different, there's like syntactic sugar in Protractor. So this looks like a jQuery, but it's really Protractor. And this is a shorthand for element by CSS. So whenever you want to find an element by CSS, you can use this shorthand notation. Otherwise, you can use element by, and then you say the locator, by CSS, by XPath. So you can use all of the WebDriver locators plus whatever you have in Protractor. Okay, so some of the best practices that I found, and I have been discussing with Julie Ralph about like these practices and how you want to structure your integration test, your end-to-end tests. One of them is using page objects. So instead of having this is kind of cryptic to read. Mm, here. This kind of cryptic because if you want to reuse this, or imagine you have like several tests, you're saying, okay, I'm gonna update one, I'm gonna delete one, I'm gonna search, I'm gonna have like multiple interactions. This is very, very difficult to read unless you have comments. So whenever I write my tests, I like having plain English. So I'm gonna show you a simplified version of this end-to-end test. So here I'm using a page object. A page object is basically abstracting whatever you have in the view and making it accessible through an object. So for each view in your application, you're going to have a page object. So here we have several elements. We have an ID, input, we have a name, and we have 3 buttons. So imagine I have a member edit page. It would have a name, a save button, a delete button. It would have navigate, so you don't have to remember what's the URL. And then you would have a get ID. So the get ID will find it from this element. So once you start using the page object, it's very, very easy to write your second integration test or your third integration test because you can reuse logic that is abstracted away in the page object. So here, you don't need the comments anymore because you can read in plain English. It flows like given, when, then. So for example, here, given that I navigate to the list page, when I click on the create button and when I say, okay, new member and save, then expect an ID to be defined and a message to be member created. And the same for updating an existing member. So it's very easy, it's very short. And here I'm saying, okay, I'm navigating, I'm clicking on the first row. So you can have something like click on row and you pass the index. You say, okay, name, send keys. It will click on the save button, and then you say, okay, member updated. And that's like, even if you don't really understand the framework, it's really easy to understand what you're testing. Okay, another best practice is making your tests independent, because sometimes if you change the order of you run a subset of your tests, they break something because you have like dependencies, either because you created some object before or you depend on that object. So my recommendation would be make your tests independent. You really don't know if you want to run only this one or this subset or in which order. I also recommend you to test one feature at a time, because I have seen like multiple assertions in the same test. And then you really don't know what you're testing. And if one feature breaks, then only one test breaks, but you really don't know what you're breaking. So be careful and have like multiple unit tests. And here I'm testing like one single feature. I'm saying, okay, create. Here I'm just saying, okay, update. Maybe I can add a integration test, end-to-end test for validation or stuff like that. Just test one concept at a time. So when it breaks, you know what's going on. And now I'm going to show you some common problems that I found. And the first one is, in my application, you have to log in. And I'm pretty sure in most of your applications, you have to log in. And we use the regular Google login application, which is not an Angular application. So when I told you that Protractor synchronizes with Angular, if you try to access a website that is not an Angular application, you're going to get an exception, because it's going to say, I was looking for Angular and I couldn't find it. So Protractor wraps an instance of driver. So you can call plain Webdriver and write a test like a regular WebDriver application. So if you want to access WebDriver, you just say browser driver, get, find element, and so on. So for your login page or whatever you want to test that is not an Angular application, use browser driver, and then you won't get that exception saying, okay, I'm waiting for Angular and it wasn't there. So another problem is like, I spend maybe 90% of my time when I'm writing an end-to-end test finding a selector. So I like CSS selectors, but sometimes you want to do something like more sophisticated, and it's not something that you can run from your console. So you can use the Element Explorer. The Element Explorer is fantastic because it allows you to open a WebDriver instance, and you can test like what's going on. I'm going to show you how to use it. So the Element Explorer is under Protractor bin, and you start it like this. So here in the project I just created, I go to Protractor, bin, Element Explorer. It will start a server, a browser for me. And this is connected to WebDriver. So you can interact either here or here. So imagine I go to Angular. It has autocomplete because I'm super lazy. It's fantastic. You say, okay, get HTTP Angular.
You got Angular.
So it's gonna complain and it's gonna say, oh, you suck at typing. Okay, I'm gonna do it out here. It's great because you can do it from the command line or here. Okay, so imagine I'm trying to find a selector for this thing, which is by model or something like that. Or maybe I want to find something by name. So let's try it. Oops, sorry. Let's do it again. So here I'm trying to find by binding, and I'm using list. List will list you like all of the bindings that it found. So here maybe selecting by binding name, it doesn't make any sense because there are multiple and you want your selectors to be unique. So here I can try something different. I can do something like by CSS or by model. Let me show you. So I want to find this item, which is to do text. And as you can see, it works. And now I have this. And this is a fantastic tool because I would usually run and run and run and run the test over and over and over again. And this is like very, very convenient. And you have the whole API here in your terminal. And I love it. Um, Sometimes you need to debug something, but it's really hard because as you can see, it goes and it flows and you don't know what's going on. So you can do two things. You can sleep or you can set something called debugger. And then you can stop the test in the middle of the run. And you can do it either from WebStorm or you can do it from the command line. If you have WebStorm, IntelliJ, or one of those IDEs, you can do something like this. So I'm gonna debug this. And it stops here. And I can see what's going on and say, okay, oh, maybe this is wrong. And I can examine, okay, this element is not visible or something like that. And then you continue. If you don't have an IDE, you can do it from the command line and you do it like this. You say debug and you pass the configuration file and you say C for continue. Hold on, I'm not in the same project. Continue. Right here, it just stopped. Sometimes you need some data in your test, and that's like a big problem, and there's really no good solution. If you can have like a pre-populated database and you can run a script and you know something is going to be there, fantastic, but it's really, really hard to do. Something that you can do is create your own data. So if you have a service that you can call from your Angular application to create the data for you, you can do this kind of hack. And you can create the data before you use it. So imagine that you have an HTTP service that interacts with the REST API, and you have a create function. You can do execute a sync script, and this runs inside the browser. So in the sample code that I have on GitHub, there's a module, there's a service. I can get a reference to the API service, and then I say, okay, member save, I pass the data, and whenever it gets a callback, it will call this callback, and it will give me the item ID. So imagine I'm writing a test for a member, and I want to update a member, but I need a member to be created first. So I created calling the REST API, and then I do something like this, create member, and then when you get the response, this is the ID of the newly created member. And it looks like this. So imagine I want to update an existing member, and for some reason it's very difficult to do it through the UI, or maybe it's too slow because you don't want to go through the entire application. For example, in my application, we have like several objects, and there are like several dependencies. If you want to test like an ad, you have to create this user and that thing, a campaign, and it's like you have to go like through several UIs. It takes like many seconds. And if any of those features break, it means that your test cannot run, and you don't know if if your feature is running or not. So what I do is I create all of the dependencies calling the REST API, and then I test my feature individually, and it's independent. So here I'm creating something called a test member. It will return an ID. It will navigate to this ID. I will say, okay, send keys updated, say button, and so on. Here you can do something like a delete scenario. Imagine that I count the number of members I have before and the number of members I have after. So here I count the number of members doing a REST API call, and then I just do an assertion at the end of the delete that the number of members has decreased by 1. And it's very convenient. You can run this uh, multiple times, and let me show you how it looks. And at the end, it will say there were n members, and now there are n minus 1. Before 16, now 15. Okay, do you have any questions? Yep. The question is if I can show the configuration. Okay, yeah. So when you run in WebDriver, it's just a regular Node application. It's here. So you have to say add node. And the trick is this one. There's a protractor command line interface, and that's a binary that you have to run. So you pass the protractor configuration file, the CLI, and working directory, and where's your node. And that's the entire configuration. Sticker. We have one here, and then.
Hey, so obvious question. Any tool to record this stuff?
Any tool to report?
Like Selenium, IDE?
We have our own tool internally, so I really don't know if there are like external tools, but maybe
Okay.
you can have like a feature request and Julie will implement it quickly.
All right. And the second simple question: have you tried this on Android driver? Or
Android
you
driver?
thought about trying it on mobile?
Sorry, I didn't
You
hear you.
thought about trying this? I mean, it should work, but have you tried it on mobile?
I think it works because I have seen some issues in the GitHub website about Android, and I think it works. I think it also works in Phantom.js, or maybe partially works, but Julie was working on that.
Quick question. What about mouse events? One of the things that I have an issue with is to figure out how to simulate a mouse-driven test.
So if you want to perform something with your mouse, it's kind of hidden. It's not very, very visible. So if you go to docs and well, there's a good example under tests. Mm, it's something like actions, and then you perform actions. Like this. So you do browser, actions, you do some stuff. You can do hover, mouse enter, mouse out, and so on. And that's how you simulate the mouse. Sticker? Okay. Another one here.
Okay. How often do you run tests? Like, what is the best on your workflow? How often is enough, and how often becomes like an OCD, like cleaning on?
We have an automated build, so it runs. I guess it depends on your project. Maybe we have like several environments and it flows from development to production through the days. So maybe every time you want to switch from this environment to the next one, because when you have end-to-end tests, you want to make sure that everything works. So whenever it makes sense, whenever you change something, whenever the database changes, whenever you apply some new schema or the middle tier changes or some configuration. So whatever changes you have in your system, you should test. Yeah. Oh, we have one.
Two questions. One following up on his question. Is there a way to run like as you go, like actually something like Karma where it notices what file you change and runs these tests first so that you can actually rely on it as unit test?
Somebody wrote a grunt task to do that. But it's very, very slow. I guess it depends on your application. My application is not the fastest one, and maybe you don't want to do that because it starts a browser, and sometimes you perform something on the database, and it will get like, I don't know, you're gonna get a lot of data if you create users and members and members and members. I don't want to end up with thousands of members.
Okay, and the second question that might be related to that as well. I didn't get the last demo part that you showed, but is there a way to not actually hit the server and like just mock to see that the request goes in and out? Because that would be much, much faster as well.
Well, you can write a unit test.
There's nothing like in
Yes, there's a
Protractor?
feature where you can inject a module in your Angular application, or you can replace a module. So imagine your application sends an email or does something that you don't want to do. So you can replace that functionality, and it's hidden somewhere here. So in this test, you can inject your own module and override whatever you have in your application. So if you want to do that, you can do it. I wouldn't advise it unless you have like some email or something like that, but that's the purpose of your integration test or of your end-to-end test, that everything flows. We have one. Yeah.
Just quick question. In the beginning of the slides, you said it waits for Angular. So I didn't understand what do you mean by waits for Angular.
Okay, waits for Angular means if you're using another framework, you don't know when your application is done. So in this case, if you go to network, there's a request that takes 2 seconds. So you have to synchronize for this event. So imagine I'm testing that clicking on one of these items will take me to the edit page, to the properties page. But it's loading data from the server. And until my response is there, it doesn't make sense to say, okay, click on the link because there is no link. So in the test, Protractor knows that Angular is still waiting for this HTTP request to come back. And then it says, okay, I'm ready, then follow. So it waits for Angular to be ready, either like a timeout or an HTTP request or some rendering. And when it's ready, then it fires. And there's no sleep, no synchronization, no wait for this to happen. It's very transparent. It's like plain English. If you make it plain English, of course.
Hi. Great benefit of Karma is that I can run Karma server and I can open web browser on any external device, connect to this server, and all the tests will be run against this device. So is there anything similar in Protractor? Because it's great to have opportunity to test desktop browser, but what about mobile device, which amount is huge?
Okay, so when you're using this, there are like extensions for Selenium or Webdriver. I think it's here. Multiple browsers. And these ones are available. And this is the only thing you can test right now. Because the WebDriver standalone server, it starts its own server. And it has to have a way to communicate its own browser. It has to tell the browser, okay, do this, do that. So you need like this like extension. So the question is, Canary now supports what? Yeah, so mobile is, yeah, it's very, very important. So I don't have a lot of experience with mobile, but Julie is gonna be working on that, adding support to more clients, more like devices. So you can follow, you can raise an issue here, and then Julie is gonna take care of it. She's really, really fast. So maybe there's something, but I don't know. She checks the issues like twice a day, even on weekends.
How long does it take the end-to-end test to run that you've made for DoubleClick?
Um, it depends on your environment. If you run it in my local machine, we have a couple dozen tests. It's like a minute because we have like thousands, and sometimes you have to request like thousand and giving more, and you see like this wait. If you do it in production, it runs in like 30 seconds. But it's because of the data. It depends on how much data you have in your environment. So if you have like a few items, it's gonna be like, boom, it returns quickly. But sometimes you have like several resources and it's like a gigantic application. It's huge, the largest Angular application. And takes sometimes a couple of seconds for a page to load. Not to load, but to be done, because it starts showing stuff, but then there are some dependencies that haven't been loaded. But it's really quick. And we used to have like Java integration tests, and they were horrible. And these ones are like super, super stable.
Is Protractor able to detect when Angular's done bootstrapping in an iframe on the page?
Yes. So there is a trick, and it's called, there's like a way to switch to an iframe. Okay, so maybe it's not documented here, but it's on Stack Overflow. There's a protractor. Something like this, and you pass the ID of the iframe.
All right, thank you.
I had a follow-up question about
Yeah, I used it last week.
about testing like how a template is connected to a controller. Do you recommend doing that with an end-to-end test or with some kind of unit test?
I guess it depends on what you want to test. So sometimes we have several directives and a controller or several controllers that interact with each other. And the best way is to do it like through end-to-end testing. If you can write good unit tests, and there are like many talks about how to write good unit tests for directives and how to connect to the view, maybe you should do it like that because it's faster. It runs in milliseconds. Protractor is slow. You have to run a server. You have to run the Selenium server. It takes forever compared to a karma test, which is just like milliseconds.
Do you have recommended best practice for ensuring that your tests don't go out of sync with the code in terms of the binding expressions or the strings you use to find the element that you need? Because it's enough that someone will change the template or something and your test will be wrong.
Well, it depends on how unstable your view is. So I would recommend you to go by binding if you can do it, or by model or something like that. If you can't, maybe you can cheat another, like a testing class. So you have like a specific class to the element you're interested in, and you say, okay, imagine I have a button here that is very difficult to find through some locator. So I can just say, okay, button ID, say button. Or you can add a class name, class Pitor, say button. And then when you're preparing your view to be deployed to production, maybe you want to minify it. And you can have some tool that will get rid of these extra classes. So you have something starting with Pitor blah. It will remove that class from the view and it doesn't go to production. But then you won't be able to test in production because that class is not going to be there. So I don't know. You can add an ID or whatever you think is not going to change.
Any more questions? No? All right, I think that's all for right now.